Hibiki is a weak, useless high schooler who is currently running for his life in an open field while being chased by a rabbit. My ego says I could probably beat that rabbit in a one-on-one, but Hibiki's ego apparently has the day off, so he doesn't want to take any chances. While he's running, he suddenly hears a strange voice in his head, and for a second, he thinks it might be his ego coming to give him advice, but whatever that voice is, it's way too lazy to even bother doing its job. Just then, the rabbit catches up to Hibiki, but in the split second before he gets stabbed, Hibiki manages to pull off one of the most accidental clutches in history. He gets the rabbit's head stuck in his bag, and then he trips and falls over right on top of its head, killing the rabbit instantly. Meanwhile, out in the forest, an elf suddenly hears a voice tell her that someone very precious has just been dropped in the east. Her name is Amalia, and as you can see, she suffers from an abundance of personality. Back on Hibiki's end, he is glad he managed to survive the rabbit attack, but he's still not sure what he's supposed to do because he has no clue where this place is. He has no cell service, and a moment ago, he was hearing voices in his head. His top priority right now should be to gather the necessities for survival, but he never really went camping as a kid, so he doesn't know how to start a fire, and he's not sure if the rabbit meat is even edible. Just as he's wondering what to do, he hears the voice in his head again, and it offers to appraise the rabbit for him. As it says this, a screen appears in front of Hibiki, and he is informed that the horned rabbit meat is indeed edible. Hibiki has no idea why he is seeing floating screens out of nowhere, but if the rabbit meat really is edible, then he decides it would be best if he took it with him just in case he needs food later. After sticking the rabbit carcass in his bag, Hibiki starts trying to figure out what that voice in his head was, and he recalls that the last time it spoke, it was responding to a question he asked, so he holds up his bag and asks what it is. Just as expected, the system responds and informs Hibiki that it is a bag made from materials that do not exist in this world. He now knows how to trigger the system's responses, so he decides to try a few other things and asks the system to appraise the sky, but the system tells him that there's nothing there to be appraised. He then looks to the ground and asks the system to appraise it, and to his horror, he is informed that he is looking at a level 273 Maze Eater. Hibiki tries it a few more times to make sure it's not a fluke, but the ground is definitely a Maze Eater, and he's not prepared to deal with that, so he decides to ignore it and move on. He then attempts to appraise himself, and sure enough, a panel shows up with his name, age, and stats all laid out. Hibiki is 16 years old, and his job is apparently that of an appraiser, which makes no sense to him, because up until a few minutes ago, he was still just a normal high schooler. He attempts to ask the system how he ended up here, but it doesn't respond to him this time, and now that he thinks about it, he has been way too casual about there being a disembodied voice in his head. He asks the system what it is, and he is informed that the system is his status support, and it is not allowed to answer any questions about personal information. It is also not allowed to talk to him unless it's answering a question, so Hibiki can't hold conversations with it at all. From his status screen, Hibiki can see that he has a bunch of skills and he's not sure what they do, so he decides to try them out one after the other. The first skill he uses is called Expert Eye, and for a second, Hibiki's ego kicks in, making him believe he's about to become a top 3 isekai protagonist with this, but nothing happens. Fortunately, no one was here to see him embarrass himself like that, but he now knows that he knows absolutely nothing about these skills, so he asks the system if there's a tutorial of some kind that he can use. The system informs Hibiki that he is already in the tutorial, but he's not sure what that's supposed to mean, so he decides to continue testing out his skills. The next one is called World Map, and as he activates the skill, a screen appears in front of him with a bunch of lines drawn on it. This isn't exactly what he was expecting when he activated the world map, but he assumes the lines must represent the path he took to get here when he was running away from the rabbit. By the looks of things, he has been traveling in circles this entire time, which is disheartening to find out, but at least now he won't make that same mistake again. After walking for a while, Hibiki eventually finds a road, and he's really excited because this means he can finally make his way to a town. But he apparently got a little too excited because he ends up tripping and falling face first onto the stone-cold road. Just then, the system informs Hibiki that he has received the title of castaway in an isekai, which makes no sense to him, so he adds it to the growing list of things he doesn't understand. As he looks away from the system window, he suddenly hears the sound of a growl terrifyingly close to him, and even my ego doesn't think I could handle this one, so Hibiki is definitely cooked. Fortunately for him, the monster gets shot in the head before it can hurt him, and the one responsible for the shot is Amalia. She walks up to Hibiki and asks if he's okay, and Hibiki says he's fine, but then she asks him what he was doing in the Maze Eater. Hibiki still has no idea what a Maze Eater is, so Amalia explains that it's a monster that usually disguises itself as grassland. It won't attack you directly most of the time, but it makes people who get stuck in it travel in circles until they eventually get exhausted, at which point it devours them. Hibiki is shocked that he was so close to being devoured, but when Amalia asks him why he was out there in the first place, he explains that it wasn't his choice. He just kind of showed up there. Amalia is really confused when she hears that. So while she's trying to figure out what Hibiki means, Hibiki tries to figure out who she is by appraising her. Thanks to the system, Hibiki learns that Amalia is a real-life elf, but the most shocking piece of information is the fact that she's 56 because he thought she was way younger. Amalia suddenly pulls Hibiki's head into her chest and says she's glad that an innocent child didn't fall victim to the maze eater, but hearing her call him a child. Hibiki asks Amalia how old she thinks he is. Because of how short Hibiki is, Amalia had assumed that he was 10 years old at most, but he informs her that he's actually 16, and pulling a random teenager into your chest is weird no matter how you look at it, especially because in this world, you are considered an adult once you turn 15. Hibiki and Amalia end up spending the night camping together, and Amalia apologizes for the misunderstanding earlier, but Hibiki says it didn't really bother him. After eating the horned rabbit Hibiki caught for dinner, the two sit down to have some tea, and Hibiki takes the opportunity to ask Amalia what this place is. She explains that this is the kingdom of Habarashia, but she doesn't understand how Hibiki could be so clueless about this country. So he explains that he's not from around here. He says he comes from a faraway country called Japan, but Amalia says she's never heard of a place like that before, and the fact that she doesn't know what Japan is confirms to Hibiki that he is indeed in a new world. Amalia can tell that Hibiki must be anxious about being so far away from home, so she offers to stay for a while and take him to a nearby city so he can get his life started, and Hibiki really appreciates the gesture. Once it's time for bed, Amalia casts an air alarm spell to warn her in case anything dangerous gets close, but Hibiki had already fallen asleep before she was done casting. She's surprised that he trusts her so much even though he literally just met her, and that's not the only thing that's strange about this kid. He has no knowledge of this world, and he is wearing clothes that she has never seen before, so she assumes he must be the precious person that the spirits told her about before she came here. Before Hibiki was sent to this world, he would spend his days hanging around with his friends, and they were all excited for the upcoming summer break since they had all grown so much, all except Hibiki, who's still a solid 4'11". The others try to encourage him by saying there's still hope for a growth spurt down the line, but Taiki, on the other hand, is actually jealous of Hibiki because, somehow, in exchange for the debuff in height, all the MILFs he meets absolutely fawn over Hibiki, and he has no idea why. Now that he thinks about it, Taiki is right. That conversation happened on the last day of school before summer break, and Hibiki was about to enter a classroom when all of a sudden, there was a bright flash of light, and the next thing he knew, he was here. Hibiki wakes up and wonders if his friends are alright because they are probably worried sick about him right now, and to make matters worse, his phone is at 12%, so it's going to be dead soon. Just then, he feels something hard hit his head, so he looks over to see where it came from, and it turns out it was just a button that couldn't contain Amalia's personality. He gets up to take a look at all the floating particles in the air, and he's curious about what they are, so he asks the system to appraise them. And he is informed that these are part of a magic barrier that Amalia set up to warn her of intruders. The fact that magic exists here is further proof that this isn't his original world, so Hibiki needs to start thinking of a way to get back as soon as possible. He sits on a rock nearby and decides to take a look at his stats again to figure out what he's got. He asks the system what an appraiser is, so the system explains an appraiser is a job class of B-rank rarity. It allows you to view the information and abilities related to a target, but since it is a non-combat class, it doesn't come with any skills that are useful in battle. That's all the system is willing to tell him. But Hibiki still has a lot of questions, like what the provisional part of his job means, but he's going to have to leave that for another day. The next morning, Amalia wakes up and is startled by the realization that her melons have been hanging in the wind all night because she didn't realize she had lost a button. A moment later, Hibiki wakes up, so she turns away in embarrassment, and when Hibiki realizes what's going on, he pulls out the button that hit him in the face last night. But that makes Amalia think he intentionally stole her button, so she punches him in the face. A little while later, once the misunderstanding has been cleared up, Amalia apologizes to Hibiki for hitting him. Hibiki says it's fine since she did give him a potion to heal his wounds, so there are no hard feelings. As they walk, Hibiki asks Amalia how far away the city is from here, and by her calculations, once they get out of the forest, they should be able to get there in about half a day. Hibiki is glad to hear that, but he is a little worried by the fact that there are monsters all over the place. Amalia tells him he doesn't need to worry about monsters as long as she's with him, but she's surprised that he could sense the monsters in the first place. Hibiki says he just saw them thanks to his world map skill, but the second Amalia hears that, she freaks out because the world map skill is an insanely useful AAA skill. She says any adventurer would love to have a skill like that, but Hibiki doesn't get what the big deal is since all it does is show him where he has been before and alert him to nearby monsters. As a matter of fact, he can see something called a crystal horned rabbit nearby, and the second Amalia hears that, she becomes excited because crystal horned rabbits are extremely valuable. They are easily worth over 200 gold coins, so she grabs Hibiki and asks him to show her where the rabbit is. They eventually track the crystal horned rabbit down, and after appraising it, Hibiki finds out a few things about it. It is stupid, it has an escape skill, and it also has a detect presence skill. Amalia is able to mask the scent and sound of herself and Hibiki using her wind magic to keep the rabbit from sensing them, but as long as it has the escape skill, none of Amalia's attacks are going to land. However, there is one exception. When the crystal horned rabbit is attacking, it can't use its escape skill, and now that Hibiki knows that, he comes up with a plan. He suggests they should trick the rabbit into attacking him so it can't use escape. Amalia doesn't think the rabbit will fall for such a simple trick, but Hibiki assures her that it will work. When it's time to execute the plan, Amalia creates a bunch of rock walls around it to force it towards Hibiki, who is laying on a rock as bait, and once it starts charging at him, she shoots it in the head. She's surprised by how easy that was since she expected such a valuable monster to be harder to catch, but she's not complaining about the easy victory. Hibiki also leveled up a lot from the success, even though Amalia was the one who killed the rabbit because he contributed a lot to the success of the plan, so it's a win-win. Hibiki and Amalia later arrive in the city of Raoul, and since Hibiki's strange clothes would probably draw some unwanted attention, Amalia offers him her hood to cover up until he can get a new set of clothes. She also reminds him they're going to get a good chunk of change after she sells this crystal horn, so they can go shopping for some armor and weapons too. Speaking of money, Hibiki asks her how much a gold coin is worth here, but she is shocked to hear that, of all things, Hibiki is even oblivious to how money works. Hibiki doesn't want to lower her impression of him any further, so he pretends that he was just joking about it and instead asks the system to explain it to him. The system responds and explains that one gold coin is worth around 10,000 yen. So when Amalia said that horn is worth 200 gold, that's the equivalent of 2 million yen. It makes sense that she was so eager to get it. Amalia puts her hand on Hibiki's face and tells him that he should probably refrain from making himself sound totally clueless in this town, because if he's not careful, he's going to get scammed. He knows she's right, but the way she said it really annoys him for some reason. A few minutes later, Hibiki and Amalia arrive at the guild, and the other guild patrons are surprised to see her, but even more surprised that a loner like her has a friend now. They don't understand why she'd be hanging out with a child, but Amalia explains that Hibiki may be vertically challenged. He is actually an adult. The adventurers assume that must mean he's a rookie, so they apologize for teasing him about his height and wish him luck on his first day. Once they are gone, Amalia takes Hibiki up to the front desk to meet the receptionist, Jewel, and Hibiki can't help but notice that Jewel has cat ears. Amalia tells Jewel that she would like to sell an item, so she wants to negotiate in a private room. Jewel understands, so she leads them to the guild master's office, where Hibiki is introduced to the guild master, Balls. The moment Hibiki sees Balls, he is left in absolute awe because he has never seen such a hulking form of perfection before. Balls can tell that Hibiki is a fellow muscle enthusiast, so he takes his shirt off to flex the fruits of his years of work. Hibiki is even more amazed now, so he asks Balls if he has any tips for him. He had tried working out in the past to make up for his lack of height with muscles, but his frame is too small, so he never got much out of it. Balls starts giving him some useful gym advice, but Jewel and Amalia are starting to get impatient because they came here to sell an item, not talk about muscles, so they both blast Hibiki and Balls with water to snap them out of it. Once the two of them have dried off, they all sit down to begin the negotiations, and as Amalia sets the horn down, Balls is impressed because this one is 3 times as big as the one she brought in a few years ago. He offers her 400 gold coins for it on the spot, and Hibiki thinks that's a really good deal since Amalia was only expecting 200 gold for it. However, he severely underestimated just how greedy Amalia can be, because now that she knows she can get more money for it, she demands 800 gold coins instead. Ball says he can't go that high on the price, but Amalia forces him into making a decision by threatening to go to the guild in the capital for a better deal. Balls eventually caves and agrees to pay 700 gold coins for it, which was way over budget. Amalia is happy that she managed to secure such a good deal for herself, because now Hibiki will definitely ask her to form a party with him, and then she won't be a loner anymore. She's so happy that she could jump for joy, but maybe she got a little too excited because her button decides to go on vacation again, and her chest is left in plain view once again. As such, Jewel kicks both Balls and Hibiki out of the room so she can fix Emalia's clothes, and since that's going to take a while, Hibiki decides to go wait at a table. While he's there, the system informs him that his level 1 tutorial skill has reached the level up requirements, which is nice. But Hibiki isn't exactly sure what that means, so he asks for an explanation. The system explains that the tutorial is a skill that basically grants plot armor to those who have an extremely low survival rate, and it was specifically designed by God to ensure that Hibiki didn't die at spawn. Hibiki can't believe he really received a skill from God, but just then, he hears a separate voice in his head, and it turns out to be that of the God who has been looking out for him. He wouldn't have made it this far without the God's help, so he is thankful. However, the God tells him that he's still got to do his best to keep himself alive, because his plot armor won't last forever. A few moments later, Emalia returns after getting her shirt fixed, but just then, she receives a letter for a mission request, and it involves her hometown, so she can't turn it down. She also isn't going to be able to bring Hibiki along, so she apologizes, but she's going to have to leave town for a while. Meanwhile, inside a dark cave, a female adventurer is busy searching for something, but no matter how much she looks, she can't find any traces of it, so she has no idea where it could be. Back in the city, Emalia asks Hibiki if he's really going to be alright on his own, but he tells her he can handle himself. He is grateful to Emalia for helping him so far, but he doesn't want to continue being a burden to her, so he needs to figure out how to get by on his own. He says he plans to become an adventurer because he saw a couple of quests back at the guild that even a non-combatant like him would be able to take. Emalia is glad to hear that Hibiki already has a plan in mind, and to make things a little easier for him, she tells him he can stay in the room she rents in the meantime. She hands him a map and tells him that when he gets there, he should ask for a lady named Tanya, and she'll take care of him. She promises to see him again once she gets back, but just as she's about to leave, Hibiki recalls that he needs to give her back her poncho. Emalia tells him he can just keep it, but Hibiki thinks she needs it way more than he does because her buttons keep popping off all the time. After recalling what happened, Emalia runs off in embarrassment because she can't believe Hibiki has seen her chest 3 times now. However, she isn't watching where she's going, so she ends up bumping into that adventurer from earlier. She manages to catch herself before she falls over and immediately apologizes, asking if the girl is okay, but the girl doesn't look away at all. A guard comes over after hearing all the commotion and asks Emalia why she's in such a rush, so Emalia explains that she's actually on her way to complete a mission in her hometown. As soon as the girl hears this, she becomes interested and asks if Emalia is referring to the elf village of Fairnote. After Emalia confirms this, the girl gets a sly grin across her face. She then mentions that she happens to be heading there as well, so she and Emalia should be able to travel together. After Emalia leaves, Hibiki spends almost all of his time sleeping indoors, and his phone battery is completely dead, so there's nothing for him to do. He doesn't really have to worry about money after the horn sale, but he still hasn't found a way to return home yet, and the god hasn't spoken to him since then. He tries asking Jewel if she knows anything about another world, but that apparently means something very different here, because she becomes all shy and points him to an NSFW place center, which is not what he was looking for. Hibiki really doesn't want people to get suspicious of him, so he has been avoiding interactions a lot lately, but he can't keep this up forever. Just then, Tanya knocks on Hibiki's door. The reason she came is because Hibiki didn't come down for breakfast or lunch earlier today, so she was starting to get worried. He assures her that he is perfectly fine, and Tanya is glad to hear it, so she reminds him that dinner will be ready soon and that he should come down when he is ready to eat. Hibiki thanks her, and after she leaves, he realizes that he's going to have to start making some money, because that whore money isn't going to last forever. He asks the system to pull up his stats so he can figure out what he would be good at, and the system does as instructed. But Hibiki doesn't really know whether his stats are good or not, so he asks the system for its opinion. The system tells him he is basically cannon fodder with his current stats, so he shouldn't even consider attempting solo combat as he is now. Hibiki kind of figured that would be the case, so he decides to take a look at his skills to see if there's anything useful there. He finds out that he has a skill called Lady's Magnet, but he's not sure what that does. He also has 2 other skills, Contract and Medicine. He asks the system what medicine does since it sounds kind of useful, and the system informs him that it is a skill that allows him to gain detailed medical knowledge by downloading 7 years of medical school right into his head. That sounds really cool, so Hibiki says he wants to try it out, but the system warns him that he can't stop the process once it starts, and the medical books are pretty thick, so it's going to take a while. Hibiki is a little hesitant after hearing that, but he still decides to go ahead with it anyway, and for once, the system sounds genuinely disappointed by his decision. Shortly after, the medical book appears in front of Hibiki, and the information transfer begins, but it hurts a lot more than Hibiki thought it would. A few days later, the knowledge transfer is finally complete, and Hibiki feels absolutely terrible because he hasn't eaten or slept for so long. He decides to head out to do some shopping and clear his head, and after getting a meal, he buys himself a set of armor and general adventuring equipment. He also comments on the fact that gaining skills is a lot harder than he thought it would be. The system tells him that not all skills require the book download method, so he doesn't need to worry about that. Hibiki also notices that the system seems a lot more talkative ever since his tutorial leveled up, and since she is actually willing to hold a conversation with him, he decides to give her a real name, saying he will call her Sapo. And Sapo seems pretty happy about it. Hibiki heads back to the guild to see if there are any quests for him, but just then, that adventurer party he met when he first arrived rushes in because one of them has been severely injured in battle. The guy is missing an arm and a leg, and he is still bleeding profusely, so if nothing is done, he's going to die in no time. Balls would have been able to save him, but unfortunately, Jewel says he's not in town right now, and they've tried all the other healing magic they know, but nothing has worked. Hibiki sees how bad the guy's condition is, and he wants to help, so he decides to try out his newly acquired medical skills to see if that helps. He walks over and asks the group if they'd be willing to let him take a look. The party is so desperate that they don't have much of a choice, so they let Hibiki examine their friend, and after using an examination skill, the system informs Hibiki that the man is currently under the effect of deer poison, which is why his bleeding isn't stopping. He only has around 5 minutes left before he dies, so the only way to save him would be to use the Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure spells. However, using those spells would cost over 600 MP, and Hibiki currently only has 56, so there's no way he could pull it off. The others see the worried expression on Hibiki's face and ask him if something is wrong, so he tells them that he knows how to treat their friend, but he can't do anything to help because he doesn't have enough mana. He asks if there's anyone else who can use Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure, but none of them have skills like that, so there aren't many options. Just then, the system informs Hibiki that he can use his contract skill to form an MP transfer contract to make up for the deficit, and all he needs to do is get verbal consent from all involved parties. As soon as he hears this, he tells everyone that they need to agree to transfer their MP to him, and since it's to save their friend, they all agree without a second thought. Hibiki gains a lot of MP thanks to the transfer, but he's still short by almost 200, so Jewel offers to transfer her MP as well. As soon as Hibiki hits the required amount, he casts the healing spells, restoring the adventurer's injured limbs and saving his life. However, Hibiki collapses a moment later from the strain of using that much MP at once. Sometime later, Hibiki wakes up on a couch in a meeting room, and his level has gone up by quite a bit, so he is really excited. But after his little celebration dance, he realizes that Jewel was in the room and she saw the whole thing, so he's a little embarrassed now. Jewel thanks him for saving her little brother, and Hibiki is surprised to find out that Jade is her brother, but he says he was happy to help. She also mentions that she took the liberty of putting a gag order in place to make sure that no one speaks of what happened today. Hibiki asks why, so she explains that it is almost unheard of for someone to be capable of using both Perfect Heal and Perfect Cure, so if word gets out, then someone is bound to try and exploit Hibiki for money. On that note, she tells him that he should probably join a party or hire a bodyguard to protect himself, since he's a non-combatant. And meanwhile, down in the dungeon, there's a wolfman who looks like he'd be perfect for the job. Hibiki decides to hire a bodyguard for himself, so he books a meeting with a man named Debbie to find one. But Debbie seems a little weird because the first thing he does after meeting Hibiki is start sniffing him. After the initial awkward introduction, Debbie brings out 5 of his strongest men and tells Hibiki to choose whoever he wants as his bodyguard, but Hibiki turns them all down immediately. He feels bad for rejecting them all, but while they were all indeed very strong, none of them had high enough MP stats. Hibiki would like to have someone around with enough MP, so if push comes to shove, he can use them to activate his medical skills. He apologizes to Debbie for being so picky, but Debbie says it's no problem at all, since after all, he can smell the scent of great financial fortune on Hibiki, so he is more than happy to do everything in his power to help him find what he's looking for. Hearing Debbie talk about the scent of fortune, Hibiki figures that must be the reason he was sniffing him earlier, and sure enough, when he takes a look at Debbie's stat screen, there's a skill there called Sense for Money, which probably allows him to smell when someone is going to become rich, but Hibiki has no idea how it works. While they continue looking for suitable candidates, Hibiki looks down a dark corridor, but Debbie tells him that the options down that path are rather flawed, so he might want to pick another corridor. He explains that the people there are neither suitable for combat nor manual labor, and they also can't afford to return to their homeland either, so Debbie decided to do them a favor and let them stay here. Hearing that these people can't return to their homeland, Hibiki wonders if they were isekai just like him, so he asks Debbie to take him to them. Debbie does as Hibiki asks and leads him down the corridor, but they eventually come across a cell with a wolfman and a little girl inside, and Debbie can already tell what Hibiki is thinking, so he clarifies that this isn't one of those slave situations. They used to have regular bedrooms, but the wolf attacked another guest a few days back because he wanted to protect the little girl. It was all a misunderstanding, but now the wolf flares up when literally anyone gets close, so they had to put him in the cell for the other's safety. Just then, the wolf yells at Hibiki to get lost, and Hibiki can see why the other guests would be scared of this guy. But when he takes a look at his stats, he notices something interesting. The system informs him that some of the wolf's stats are currently hidden, so it uses Expert Eye to peer past the falsifications, and Hibiki finds out that the wolf is currently bound by a status ailment known as Immovable Chain, and it is basically an invisible curse that severely weakens a target permanently, which is why the wolf's stats look so mediocre now. But before the curse, he used to be a level 95 hero, and Hibiki wasn't expecting to find someone so amazing. Next, he tries to appraise the little girl, and he finds out that her name is Lillian, but more importantly, he finds out that she is a sage with the status ailment of out-of-control magic. She possesses immense amounts of magic power, but since she can't control it, she will likely end up self-destructing at some point. Both Lillian and Claude have more than enough magic power for what Hibiki needs, but he's a little concerned about the implications of him hiring a hero and a sage to be his bodyguards. Sapo suggests that Hibiki should use the relief measure technical skill since it has the ability to lift status ailments depending on his proficiency, and if that means Hibiki can help Claude, then he wants to give it a try. He tells Debbie that he wants to hire Claude and Lillian, and after that, he takes them out to the forest. Claude's condition is pretty bad since he's missing 2 arms and a leg, but he is still being really protective of Lillian because he thinks Hibiki plans to do something bad to her now that they are out in the woods alone. Hibiki does admit that he plans to do a lot of things, but he assures Claude that there's nothing to be worried about. First, he says he wants to heal Claude's injuries, but to do that, he's going to need a lot of MP, so he asks Lillian to lend him a hand. Claude thinks this must be some kind of trap and warns Lillian not to trust Hibiki, but if this is going to help heal Claude, then Lillian is willing to do whatever it takes because she owes him a lot for looking out for her. She agrees to help Hibiki, so the MP sharing contract is formed, and now that he has a sufficient supply of mana, he is able to cast Perfect Heal on Claude to restore all of his limbs. Claude is amazed because he never could have imagined that he would meet someone with magic strong enough to restore his body, although he'd be lying if he said he felt as good as he did in his prime. Hibiki already expected that, and he assumes it's probably because of the curse, so he will handle that next. Claude is shocked to learn that Hibiki is aware of his curse since it should be invisible to even the best appraisers, but Hibiki explains that he has the Expert Eye skill, which allows him to see things that most appraisers wouldn't be able to. That's also how he knows that Claude used to be a hero, and that Lillian will be a sage when she grows up. But that aside, it's time for him to get rid of that curse. He casts the release spell, and all of a sudden, the invisible chains binding Claude materialize as a pair of scissors descends from above. With one swift motion, the scissors cut one of the chains binding Claude, and Hibiki is quite disappointed since he thinks it's lame that the spell was only able to cut one of the chains. But this is the best he can do when his relief skill is still only at level 1. That said, even though only one of the chains was cut, Claude can still feel a portion of his former strength returning to him, and he is deeply grateful to Hibiki for his help, so he offers to swear his allegiance to him. Hibiki says he doesn't mind, and Claude is happy to hear that, but then Sapo speaks up and suggests that Hibiki should use his contract skill to perform the Pledge of Allegiance. The contract skill has the ability to hold all parties to their promises, so if Claude pledges his allegiance to Hibiki with a contract, he will never be able to betray him. Hibiki thinks that sounds fair since Claude was the one who suggested pledging allegiance in the first place, so Claude performs the pledge, and after the contract has been formed, a mark appears on the hands of Hibiki and Claude to symbolize their pact. After the pact has been completed, Hibiki sits down with Claude and Lillian to explain a few of his abilities to them. He mentions that he is able to use a bunch of high-level medical spells, but he doesn't have enough MP to activate any of them, which is why he needs to share their MP in order to use his abilities effectively. For that reason, he asks them if they'd be willing to form a permanent MP sharing contract with him, and both Lillian and Claude agree without a second thought. After forming the contract, Sapo informs Hibiki that his technical skill grimoire has leveled up, and Hibiki is about to ask what that means, but all of a sudden, Claude says he has a question he'd like to ask. He has been meaning to ask about this for a while now, but every so often, he sees Hibiki look off into empty space while talking to himself, so he is worried that something might be wrong with him. Hibiki assures him that it's nothing to be worried about, and he explains that he simply has a voice in his head that provides him with useful information from time to time. And Hibiki kind of expected him to think he's crazy after saying something like that, but to his surprise, Claude actually seems to know about the voice. He recognizes it as the tutorial skill, and if Hibiki has the tutorial skill, then that must mean that he's a person who was brought here from another world. Hibiki can't believe Claude knows about transmigrators, but he doesn't really know much about the title. He had just heard about it before. However, Lillian, on the other hand, has never heard of isekai before, so she asked for an explanation, and Claude explains that it simply means that Hibiki came from a faraway place. Hibiki asks them if they are really okay with him being from another world. Claude says it doesn't bother him at all, and furthermore, anyone would be happy to team up with Hibiki since he is someone who possesses the elusive tutorial skill that is only directly granted by God. Hibiki is shocked to learn that the tutorial skill is really that overpowered, so he calls up God and asks him if it's really that strong. God says it's not that big of a deal, but then again, the tutorial skill is currently eating up about a third of his power, so maybe it is overpowered. After discussing the details with Claude, he says he believes that the god Hibiki is connected to is the chief god. All in all, there are 11 gods that exist in this world, and the chief god is believed to be the first one, so divine abilities like the tutorial and expert eyes can only be granted by him. Hibiki had no idea that the chief god was the oldest one in this world because he always speaks casually to him, but Claude thinks that means the chief god must have taken a liking to Hibiki. However, Hibiki thinks that if anything, the gods favor Claude and Lillian more because being granted the skills of a hero and a sage are incredible. Though, he does think that the gods went a little too far when they gave Lillian the Raging Sanctuary skill because it's a little too much for a child to bear. Lillian asks what Hibiki is talking about since she has never heard about the skill before, so Hibiki explains that it's a skill that gives her enormous amounts of magic power, so much so that her body can't control it all. Lillian is heartbroken to hear that because that uncontrollable magic is what caused her to be ostracized by her family and sold to settle alone. Claude mentions that magical skills like that are usually the jurisdiction of the magic god, so Hibiki doesn't understand why the chief god gave Lillian a skill like that, and the chief god admits that he may have messed up when he gave Lillian that skill. When the magic god finds out what he did, she is absolutely livid. After dealing with the chief god, the magic god introduces herself to Hibiki and apologizes for the trouble, but once one of her skills has been assigned, it can't be taken back, so Lillian is stuck with the Raging Sanctuary. But fortunately, Hibiki also happens to possess one of her grimoire skills, so since he is currently linked to Lillian via contract, her MP can be regulated if he adjusts the output. Hibiki decides to try out the skill the god of magic talked about, so he activates it, and a little cat named Ven spawns. Ven explains that she was sent by the god of magic to explain the ins and outs of magic to him, but before she can even finish her sentence, Lillian picks her up and starts petting her because she's so cute. Hibiki joins in on the fun as well, and Claude looks visibly upset because he is feeling left out. Once Hibiki is done petting Vane, he asks her what exactly he needs to do to use magic, and she explains that she herself is the grimoire, so she will take care of all the spell casting for him. Hibiki thanks her for the help and pets Vene on the head again, but doing so sends Claude over the edge because Hibiki hasn't pet him even once, yet this cat that appeared 10 seconds ago has been receiving so much attention from him, and he won't stand for this injustice. A moment later, Claude calms himself down and apologizes for the outburst, and Hibiki completely ignores the whole thing while asking Vene to explain a few things about magic to him. But Vene is too shocked by everything that just happened to even move. Hibiki decides to take Claude and Lillian to go shopping for some gear, and after Claude has picked out his armor, he looks like a true warrior. That said, Hibiki is rather surprised by the fact that Claude uses a spear as his main weapon, since he always assumed a hero would only use a sword. Claude explains that a spear is the most suitable weapon for his build, and as for why he's only wearing a partial set of armor, it would be way too hot in there if he wore a full set. After Claude, Lillian picks out some gear as well, and Hibiki thinks it looks good on her, but then the storekeeper tells him it's going to cost 25 gold, and Hibiki is in shock at first because that sounds like a steep price, but apparently, that's pretty cheap as far as adventuring gear goes. Lillian tells Hibiki he doesn't need to buy the gear for her if it'll cost too much, But Hibiki assures her that it's perfectly fine because her life is way more important to him than a little money. But even though he says that, with how much they've already spent, they are going to be broke soon if they don't complete some quests soon. And to make matters worse, because Veni is feeling left out with everyone else getting new gear, he picks out a collar, which costs Hibiki an additional 15 gold coins. Later that day, Veni brings everyone out into the plain so he can give Hibiki his first magic training lesson, and Hibiki asks if they can put this on hold for a while because they need to make some more money first, but Veni insists that this is really important since both Hibiki and Lillian lack any knowledge of the fundamentals of adventuring, much less the basics of magic. Veni promises to teach Hibiki everything he needs to know about magic, and Hibiki gets excited because he thinks this means he will be able to fight with magic. But unfortunately, Ven tells him that the best he's ever going to get is some basic household magic, and Hibiki falls into despair when he hears that because it means he's going to be stuck as a weakling forever. Even so, Veni tells him that it's important to learn how to control magic power, so for their first lesson, he is going to have Hibiki learn how to circulate mana so he can get Lillian's magic power under control, and the first step towards that end is to register him as an accountable party. Hibiki asks him how he's going to do that, but before he can even get an answer, Veni bites his finger, and that was apparently all it took to complete the registration. Ven then goes up to Lillian, and he tells her that from now on, her magic power is going to be limited to around 10%, so she doesn't cause her body any harm. And the more she learns how to control her magic successfully, the more she will be able to unleash her true power. The next step of the process is to have Hibiki dual cultivate with Lillian and circulate mana between his and her body to stabilize it. But Hibiki has no idea how to do any of that. So Vinay asks Claude to inject some of his mana into Hibiki's body so he can get a feel for it. Claude does as instructed, and a moment later, Hibiki finds himself in an empty space with no one else around him. A moment later, he notices an elf lady sitting by the lake, so he goes up to her, and she calls him by Claude's name. Hibiki is confused by this at first, but then he looks down at himself and realizes he really is Claude, so this must be Claude's memories. The elf woman's name is Anastasia, and Claude had been by her side since she was little. They fought, cried, and laughed together, and Claude had hoped that things would remain that way forever. But one day, Anastasia betrayed him, slaughtering a whole troop of soldiers and severing Claude's arm, all with a smile on her face. By the time Hibiki wakes up, he sees Claude standing over him, asking if he's awake, and at first, Hibiki is still convinced that he is Claude, but after a few minutes, he is reminded of who he is. He thinks it's weird that he genuinely believed he was Claude for a moment there, but Veni explains that it was likely because having Claude share his mana with him plunged Hibiki deep into Claude's consciousness, so he lost his sense of self for a while. On that note, Veni asks Hibiki if he happened to see anything interesting in Claude's memories, but Hibiki can't actually remember much of what happened aside from the fact that it was bad. A little while later, Hibiki is busy training himself to learn how to use household magic, and in order to learn the magic, he needs to repeat the actions of chores over and over before he can learn it. But he has been at this for a while now, and according to Sapo, he still hasn't made any progress learning household magic. Just then, Lillian and Claude come in looking for Hibiki, because it's time for dinner, but Claude accidentally knocks over a bucket, undoing all of Hibiki's hard work mopping the floor. He begs Hibiki for forgiveness, but Hibiki says it's not that big of a deal since he can just clean the floor again, and while Claude is still contemplating what he has done, Hibiki proceeds to speed clean the entire room, as well as the entire hallway. After he's done, he asks Sapo if that was enough for him to unlock the household magic yet, but Sapo tells him he's still got a long way to go. Just then, the hostess comes up to call the group down for dinner, and she is amazed by what she sees because the hallway has never been this clean before. She asks Hibiki if he was the one who did this, and after he confirms it, she tells him she is very pleased. So pleased, in fact, that she offers to slip him some extra milk during dinner, and Hibiki thinks nothing of it, but she was probably talking about giving it to him straight from the source. Later on, Hibiki and Lillian are continuing their magic training, and Lillian has already learned how to conjure some basic spells, which Hibiki thinks is very impressive, while she and Vene are working on improving her control. Claude goes up to Hibiki and asks if he would like to do some physical training today. Hibiki isn't exactly against the idea, but he doubts he's strong enough to use a sword in battle. But not to worry because Claude already thought of that, which is exactly why he brought a bow for Hibiki to use instead. He sets up a target for Hibiki to take aim at, and Hibiki does his best, but unsurprisingly, he sucks at archery just as much as everything else. However, no matter how useless Hibiki may seem, Claude refuses to give up on him, so he orders Hibiki to stretch his back, pull the bowstring back further, and try again. Now that Hibiki is using proper form, his arrows are at least making it all the way to the tree, but his aim is still trash. Hibiki is exhausted because he had no idea that archery was so demanding, because Amalia made it look so effortless, but Claude tells him he will get used to it the more he practices. Hibiki asks him if they can at least take a break for today because his hands are all red and swollen, but Claude casually tells him to stop being silly, because Hibiki can use healing magic to heal his hands, so there's no need for him to ever take a break. And just like that, Hibiki is forced to fire arrows over and over at the tree and elsewhere. Amalia is still on her journey back to her hometown, and she wonders how Hibiki is doing. She's sure he'd be surprised to learn that she has actually made friends on her journey, and Styria notices that Amalia seems to be in a good mood about something. But Amalia says she doesn't know what Styria is talking about. The path up ahead splits into two sections, but even though Amalia knows one of the paths is shorter, she still suggests that they should take the other path. Ivor asks why. So Amalia explains that the shortcut leads through a ruined forest, and rumor has it that the souls who haunt that forest play tricks on anyone who approaches, so it's best to keep their distance. However, despite Amalia's warning, Ivor thinks the forest sounds interesting and decides that she wants to go check it out. Amalia doesn't understand why Ivor could possibly want to go into a haunted forest, but Ivor says locations like these are usually the kind of place where you'd find hidden treasure, so it's worth checking out. Amalia understands her line of thinking, but she's pretty sure any hidden treasures must have been picked clean by passing adventurers already. That said, she still agrees to go because she's pretty much broke right now, so if there's a chance to find some treasure, she might as well go for it. Meanwhile, back on Hibiki's end, while Lillian continues her training, Hibiki is busy making lunch for everyone, and after tasting the meal, he realizes that it's a little bland. So he's about to add some spices, and Lillian wants to help, so she hands Hibiki the salt and pepper, and when she tastes the food, she thinks it's absolutely delicious. Now that the food is ready, Hibiki serves everyone and they all love the food he made, but when it comes to the sides that Claude made, Hibiki tries to eat a mushroom, and as soon as he takes a bite, he realizes that something is wrong because Claude didn't clean the mushroom properly. He also notices a distinct lack of apples at the table when he recalls asking Claude to go get some, and Claude tries to pretend that he forgot, but Lillian finds a whole pile of apples behind him. So she starts scolding Claude and tells him he shouldn't be hiding his mistakes. Hibiki asks if Claude at least knows how to butcher monsters, since most adventurers are capable of doing that much, and Claude proudly states that he's great at butchering, so Hibiki tells him that that's going to be his job from now on because his cooking skills are absolute garbage. Claude shrinks back in shame and tries to explain that his lack of cooking skills is because of the curse, and that if Hibiki ever manages to get rid of the curse, then he really will be good at cooking. But neither Hibiki nor Lillian really believe him. Speaking of the curse, Hibiki asks Claude if he knows who placed the curse on him in the first place, and Claude thinks about it for a second, but then he responds by saying he doesn't know, and Hibiki doesn't question him any further after that. A little while later, everyone is done with dinner for the day, so Hibiki is washing the dishes in the river when all of a sudden, he is informed that he finally unlocked a household chore spell that allows him to wash things automatically. Hibiki is really excited to hear this, but Seppo actually has one more thing to mention, so she warns him that there's a large boar monster heading this way. Sure enough, there really is a boar monster, and it seems really mad for some reason, but Hibiki and the others aren't really worried because Claude is here to deal with it, and with one strike from his spear, the boar drops dead to the ground. Even though the immediate threat has been dealt with, Claude warns that if they don't do something about the boar's blood soon, then the scent of blood will attract even more monsters. This is where the new spell Lillian learned comes in, because she is able to use it to suck up and isolate all the blood from the boar, so all that's left is a clean carcass, and now Claude plans to use the opportunity to teach Hibiki how to butcher a monster so he can try it himself next time, and Hibiki seems a little hesitant because butchering sounds really gross. Meanwhile, back on Amalia's end, she and the others have just reached the fort in the ruined forest, and Ivor is convinced that if there's going to be treasure, then it must be in there. Both Amalia and Styria decide to go in to check it out, and while they are gone, Ivor checks if this place contains the restless soul that she's after, but even though there are indeed restless souls here, it's not what she's after. Meanwhile, inside the fort, Amalia and Styria seem to have fallen victim to the ghostly tricks here, because Amalia is currently hallucinating that she found a ton of treasure, and Styria is hallucinating that she's getting to stuff her face in Amalia's chest, but in reality, neither of those things are happening. Back with Hibiki, the group is done packing up all the boar meat, and they are preparing to continue their journey, but all that work got them really dirty, so Hibiki wants to take a bath, but there's no time for that right now. Fortunately, he has the bubble wash spell now, so he says he wants to try it out, but hearing him say this gets Lillian and Claude on edge, because considering how bad Hibiki is at everything, they don't want to risk letting him use a new spell on them. However, it's already too late to back out now since Hibiki has already cast the spell on Claude, and it turns out that it works really well because Claude looks like a Wolfman model now. Hibiki and the others are pretty broke right now after all the expenses they have incurred, so he suggests that they should finally start taking adventuring quests to make some money. Everyone is in agreement on this since Hibiki and Lillian have gotten a fair bit stronger after all their training, but Claude still insists that they start with only F-rank jobs. After that, they go to Jewel to officially register as adventurers, and once that is done, Claude picks out a bunch of F-rank quests for them to do. Hibiki asks him why they are doing so many, so he reminds Hibiki that F-rank quests pay close to nothing. So if they want to make any real money, they need to complete multiple at once. Among all the quests, Claude happens to notice that one quest is ranked pretty high. The quest is to find a bandit who is on the run, but the only lead available on who this bandit is the sale of their tail. And that's not a lot to go off, which is why the quest rank was raised. Hibiki doesn't really have any intention of getting involved with bandits, so he decides to just ignore it and carry on with the missions he currently has. A little while later, Hibiki is out in the forest hunting, and he has found a rabbit close by, so he raises his bow to see if he can take it down from here. Several failed attempts later, Hibiki does manage to take out the bunny, and while it may have been a pitiful demonstration of marksmanship, at least Hibiki managed to eventually hit his target this time, so that's a major improvement. A little while later, Lillian and Veni return after gathering some fruit in the woods called machikachika. It is mainly used as a marker so you don't get lost while traveling in the forest, and to demonstrate, Lillian proceeds to chuck one of the fruit at a tree, covering it in rainbow-colored juice. Meanwhile, on Amalia's end, her group has set up camp for the night, and they are approaching the border of the Elven Kingdom, so their journey has almost come to an end. Ivel is quite disappointed with how this turned out because she hasn't found any traces of the woman's soul she has been looking for, and Amalia still has no idea that Ivel only agreed to come because of her search and not because she wanted to be friends with her. She even offers her a special friendship bracelet, which will alert her if anything bad ever happens to Ivel so she can come to her rescue immediately, and Ivel accepts it, deciding that she might as well continue pretending to be Amalia's friend. The next day, Hibiki heads into town with Claude and Lillian, and he says that they can splurge a little on a nice meal today since they made a lot of money yesterday. Gathering herbs was rather easy thanks to Hibiki's skill, and he gathered so much that the clerk began to suspect that he had done something illegal to get them. Just then, as they were walking, Hibiki happens to come across Balls, and it has been a while since he last saw him since he has been away on a business trip to the capital for a while now. Balls is happy to see Hibiki again and asks him if he has managed to build up any muscle since last time. But Hibiki doesn't have much to show for his efforts, so Balls offers to give him a few pointers on how to build the perfect physique. However, before he could do anything, Claude steps in front of Hibiki and tells Balls that he is the only person who is allowed to train Hibiki, so Balls has no right to butt in like this. Balls tells him he's doing a terrible job of training him since he clearly doesn't have enough muscle to be an effective adventurer. But Claude believes that growing large muscles will only slow Hibiki down, so there's no point in doing weight training. The two are really starting to get on each other's nerves now, so they both draw their weapons and attack one another. Claude tries to tackle Balls to the ground, but Balls' thick muscles make him as sturdy as a brick wall, so he doesn't even budge an inch. He then begins putting pressure on Claude, and the shockwave from their clash is starting to cause collateral damage, so Hibiki is starting to wonder how strong Balls really is. He asks Sapo to scan him, and after she does, it is revealed that Balls' stats are absolutely stacked, so there's no way Claude can win this battle. Balls tells Claude to just give up already and knocks him back because he is clearly stronger, but Claude refuses to back down. However, before the two could start fighting again, Jewel shows up after hearing all the commotion, and she blasts them with a wave of ice magic to stop the fight. After Claude and Balls have been incapacitated, all of a sudden, a fat woman comes running down the street yelling that someone just stole her purse. And speaking of thieves, Benny asks Hibiki where his bag of money went. Hibiki had no idea that the bag was even gone in the first place, but Jewel tells him that when she got here, he wasn't holding a bag at all. She assumes this must have been the work of that bandit she told him about yesterday, and he's mortified because all of his hard work just went to waste. Jewel apologizes for his loss, but there's not much she can do to help, since they don't have any info on what the bandit looks like. All they know is that the bandit can make their tail look like a snake sometimes, and they usually target rich people whenever they are stealing. That really isn't much information to work with, but they need to do something if they are going to get their money back. So they come up with a plan and have Hibiki disguise himself as a girl to lure the bandit out without them recognizing him. The idea is that if they leave a fake bag of money on the edge of the table, then when the thief inevitably tries to come steal it, they'll be able to catch her red-handed, and Claude is waiting at a nearby table to beat the crap out of the bandit for stealing from Hibiki. Soon after, the waiter comes over to take Hibiki's order, and Hibiki decides to order some pancakes. But after the waiter brings the order out to him, Claude suddenly gets up and yells that they've been tricked because it turns out that the waiter was the bandit all along. And she just stole the dummy bag that they left on the table, and she is currently running away as they speak. Fortunately, they had thought ahead and put some of the machikachika fruit juice in the bag, so they are able to follow the trail and track the bandit down to an underground club. The place may look shady, but everyone here is actually pretty nice, and nothing illegal is going on. So they start wondering what a bandit would be doing down here. But just then, a woman in a hoodie brushes past Hibiki, and Claude thinks she looks rather familiar, so he asks Hibiki to use his appraisal skill on her, and sure enough, they find out that the woman is indeed the bandit. They follow her out into an alleyway and Claude cuts her off from the front, while Hibiki and Lillian cut her off from behind. Fauna tries to feign ignorance and asks them if there's something wrong, but Hibiki already knows for sure that she's the bandit, because his appraisal skill showed him everything, including her full government name and the fact that she's got a special tail transformation skill. Fauna realizes that there's no point in hiding anymore if he already knows that much about her, so she takes off her cloak to reveal herself, and Claude clearly thinks she's hot. Fauna goes on to say she knows that Hibiki was trying to trick her with the dummy purse he set on the table earlier, but she managed to grab the real one off him as well when she brushed past him back there, though. The contents weren't as impressive as the bag she stole from him earlier. Now all that's left is for her to make her escape, so she knocks on some wood nearby, causing a bunch of wood to come crashing down in Hibiki and Lillian's directions, so Claude is forced to go save them, buying Fauna enough time to get away. Claude and Lillian get buried under the wood, so they won't be able to get out for a while, so it's up to Hibiki to go after Fauna on his own. He does his best, but as he is chasing Fauna, he ends up falling into one of her traps and getting strung up by his feet. Fauna is surprised because even though she's a master trap setter, it's almost unbelievable that an appraiser would fall for such a simple trap. Just then, she takes a closer look at Hibiki's shorts, and she's shocked to find out that he's actually a boy. She asks him why he is dressed up like a girl, and Hibiki says he did it to catch her as bait, but even if that was the case, that doesn't explain why he was still wearing the dress after they figured out who she was. Fauna has grown rather interested in Hibiki because she thinks he's pretty cute, so she offers him a deal and says she's willing to give back his money, but in exchange, he will have to do something for her. Hibiki asks her if she wants him to appraise stolen goods for her, and that's pretty much the gist of it. She wants to know whether the things she stole are actually worth something or not, so she takes Hibiki to a bar downtown and starts showing him items from her stash one after another. The first item is a jewel-encrusted ring, and after appraising it, Hibiki confirms that it is indeed real. However, the same can't be said for the second item because although it may look like a pearl necklace, it's actually just a necklace of random rocks that simply happen to look like pearls. Seeing that Hibiki's appraisal skills are the real deal, Fauna slides a wooden bracelet over to him, and Hibiki is a little surprised since this thing doesn't really look like it's meant to be valuable. But he appraises it anyway and tells Fauna that it is an ordinary wooden bracelet with an inscription on it. Hearing this, Fauna perks up and asks Hibiki if he can tell her what the inscription says, so Hibiki tells her that it just says thank you. And Fauna is unbelievably happy to hear that. She explains that the bracelet was the last gift she ever got from her sister, and she has been trying to figure out what the inscription says for a long time, but no one could ever decipher what it said. Which makes sense since Fauna's sister didn't really know how to write, so it just looks like a bunch of nonsense. But Hibiki's appraisal was able to read the intent behind the scribbles even if it was illegible. Hibiki asks if Fauna's sister knows that she's a thief, but Fauna tells him her sister is actually long dead. She got mixed up in some battles back home and didn't make it out alive. Fauna asks Hibiki where he comes from, and Hibiki says he's from a faraway place. So Fauna tells him that if he has a home to go back to, then he had better go back because if he loses it, he won't have anywhere to turn to. He may not really understand what she's talking about, but if Claude is from the same place as her, then she's sure he must have a past that's just as dark as hers. Anyway, she's going to leave now, and as promised, in return for Hibiki's help, she gives him his money back. She also kisses him on the cheek and says she looks forward to seeing him again. Later on, Hibiki returns to the others and tells them about what happened. And even though Fauna got away, at least he managed to get his money back. While he's here, Balls also mentions that he heard that there's a party in the capital that has been growing very quickly lately. They call themselves the Corpse Killers, and they mostly hunt undead, but Hibiki had no idea zombies were even a thing in this world, so he's honestly a little scared, especially since there's a chance that he might run into zombies someday as well. Later on, Hibiki and the others are preparing for bed, and Hibiki is thinking about everything he learned today, but Claude tells him he's bound to learn even more things when he goes on a journey eventually. Hibiki thinks about it, and he does like the idea of going on a journey, especially since it will be a good way for him to figure out how to get back to his world. But when Lillian hears that Hibiki wants to go back to his world, she freezes because she can't believe that he wants to leave them. Hibiki hadn't really thought about it before, but going back home really does mean that he'd be abandoning everything he has here, and he's not sure if that's what he really wants. Meanwhile, Amalia's group is closing in on the elf village, but while they are walking, Amalia mentions the fact that she once got a message from the spirit telling her that something precious has landed in the eastern part of the Rowell Forest, and the second Ivel hears that. She thinks it might be a good lead on her search, so she quits pretending to be Amalia's friend and ditches her to continue her search. Sometime later, Ivor seems to have found the soul she was looking for, and now all that's left is for her to track down a guy named Claude. And she thinks it should be easy, since the last she heard, he was severely weakened and had lost a few of his limbs. Back in the city, Claude asks Hibiki if he really wishes to meet the sages, and Hibiki confirms this, so Claude tells him they are going to have to go to the city of Terradinas. Hibiki has never heard of a place like that before, so he asks where it is, and Veni explains that Terradinas is towards the north. The fastest way to get there would be by taking a shortcut through the northern dungeon, but Hibiki has no idea what a dungeon is either. Claude explains to him that a dungeon is a dangerous place full of all sorts of different monsters, and for that reason, he doesn't think it's a good idea for them to go through there, at least not until they've trained a lot more. Just then, Balls happens to walk in, and he can see that the group is in the middle of a serious conversation, so he asks them what's wrong. Hibiki explains that he and Lillian aren't strong enough to go on a journey that passes through a dungeon, and hearing that, Balls tells him not to worry because he has the perfect solution for his predicament. Later that day, he takes Hibiki out into the forest and tells him it's time to finally start building up his muscles. Claude doesn't like the idea of Balls encroaching on his training time, but he has to admit that if Hibiki is going to improve in any meaningful way, then he needs to get stronger, and Hibiki is prepared to do his best. However, Balls' training is a little more than what Hibiki's body can handle because it consists of juggling rocks, cracking walnuts in between his fingers, and fishing for boulders. But regardless of how tough it is, Hibiki continues trying his best. Meanwhile, on the sidelines, Ven notices that Lillian looks a little sad, so he asks her what's wrong. Lillian explains that she's upset because Hibiki is only working this hard because he wants to return to his original world, and that means he's going to leave her behind. Veni can't tell whether Hibiki truly intends to leave Lillian behind or not, but regardless of his intentions, he is still the same person he was when Lillian met him, so she shouldn't change the way she thinks about him just because he wants to go home. Just then, Tanya happens to come by to watch Hibiki train, and late into the evening, Hibiki is now practicing his bowmanship again, but he still sucks at it. By the time he's done training, Hibiki is absolutely exhausted, but he does feel a sense of accomplishment because he worked really hard today. He asks Seipo to show him his stats so he can see how much he improved, but to his surprise, his stats are exactly the same as they were before he started training. Claude and Balls find that odd since Claude is sure that the amount of bow practice Hibiki did should have been enough to acquire an archery skill, and Balls is certain Hibiki's strength should have increased by now, but neither can agree on a reason for Hibiki's stagnant stats, so they start blaming each other. A little while later, everyone takes a dip in the hot spring, and Claude is having a good time, since it has been a while since he got a chance to relax like this. Hearing Claude say this, Hibiki is reminded of the fact that Claude has a really tragic past, and he would like to learn more about that, so he asks Claude where he comes from. Claude explains that he used to live in a kingdom called Bistronia, but the city was destroyed, and all his friends and family were killed in the process. Hibiki offers his condolences, but Claude tells him there's no need because that was a long time ago, and right now, all that Claude cares about is being by Hibiki's side for as long as possible. Later that night, while everyone is sitting around the campfire, Lillian apologizes to Hibiki for being so distant lately, but she says she really doesn't want him to leave because she cares about him. That said, she understands that it would be selfish of her to ask him to give up on returning home for her sake, so instead, she just gives him a gift. Hibiki asks her what this is, so Lillian explains to him that it's a drink designed to help with exhaustion. She doesn't know what to do to support Hibiki in his quest to return home, so this is the best she could come up with. And Hibiki is sincerely moved by her thoughtful gesture, so he drinks it with great gratitude. Meanwhile, over on Amalia's end, she is finally back in the elf village, and she is currently taking a bath to relieve all the stress from the journey. But she's a little disappointed that she hasn't gotten a chance to see her father yet, especially since he was the one who called her back on such short notice. By the time she's done with her bath, Ivel and the other maids bring a dress out for Amalia to try on, and she's a little confused by this since it's not like she's here for a party. But Styria tells her that they actually are throwing a party. The king is hosting a feast later that day, and he wants Amalia to attend, which is why he got her this dress. Amalia is now pissed and asks Styria if this party is the only reason her father asked her to return, and as far as Styria knows, that's exactly what happened. Sometime later, out in the forest, Ivor has managed to track down Claude and the others from Hibiki's party, and she's lying in wait so she can intercept them. Hibiki and the others are out here hunting for a silver ruby wolf, but to their surprise, even though all signs point to a silver ruby wolf being nearby, Hibiki's scan is telling him there's nothing nearby. He thinks something is off, and just then, they hear some rustling in the bushes, so Claude raises his spear and prepares to attack. But Ivor puts on an innocent bystander act to convince them that she's not a threat. The act works on Hibiki, so he tells Claude to put his weapon away, and under Hibiki's order, Claude does so. Hibiki doesn't see her as an immediate threat, but he still thinks it's odd that his scan didn't pick up on her at all, so he starts appraising Ivor to see if there's anything suspicious about her. Ivor realizes that Hibiki must be appraising her right now, so she tenses up a little, but even after Hibiki is done with his appraisal, he doesn't find anything out of the ordinary on Ivor's stat screen. Now that they all believe Ivor has been cleared of suspicion, she walks up to Claude and starts feeling up his arm using the excuse that she wants to check out his muscles, but in reality, she simply wanted to verify whether this was a real arm or not, because she could have sworn that she cut it off all those years ago. The others are starting to get suspicious again since Ivor has been touching Claude's arm for a while now, so they ask her what she's doing all the way out in the forest like this, and Ivor makes up an excuse, saying that she was being chased by a silver ruby wolf and ended up running all the way out here. Hibiki gets excited after hearing that since that's the wolf he and the others are looking for, so he asks her where it went, and Ivor informs him that the wolf ran deeper into the forest. After saying that, Ivor notices that Lillian has been staring at her for a while now, almost as if she's onto her, so she decides to leave before she gets found out, and after Ivor is gone, they admit that they were all a bit weirded out by her, but Hibiki checks his map and finds out that there really is a wolf down in the woods, so they decide to go after it. They eventually track down the wolf, and they are about to take it out, but just then, Sappo warns Hibiki that he's in danger, and when he checks the map, there are now dozens of wolves surrounding him on all sides. And moments later, Hibiki gets slashed across the shoulder by one of the wolves. The one behind the attack is Ivor, and she is currently sitting in a tree nearby while controlling the wolves. She doesn't understand how Claude managed to regrow his limbs or get rid of part of her curse, but she says it won't matter as long as her wolves eat him alive. Lillian tries to use a healing potion to fix Hibiki's wound, but it isn't working for some reason, and at this rate, it's only a matter of time before Hibiki dies from blood loss. Benny tells Lillian to use the maintenance spell on Hibiki for now to stop him from bleeding, but that's just a temporary solution to the problem, so they need to find a way to treat Hibiki before it's too late. Claude tells Lillian to take Hibiki back to town because he's sure that Balls must have some way of helping him, but Lillian doesn't want to leave him behind. Claude assures her that he will be fine on his own, but if they don't get Hibiki out of here right now, then he is definitely going to die. Lillian reluctantly agrees and casts a lion golem to carry her and Hibiki as they escape back to the city, and Claude stands guard to protect their escape, but he soon realizes that something is off. He was prepared to stop the wolves from chasing after Hibiki, but they don't seem to care about Hibiki and Lillian at all. In fact, it seems like they are targeting Claude specifically, and as Claude gets a good look at one of the wolves, he can tell by the look in the wolf's eyes that they are being controlled, and he gets the feeling Anastasia is behind this somehow. Meanwhile, on Lillian's end, as she is heading to town, a different pack of wolves suddenly begins chasing after her, and it would be really bad if they got caught. So Lillian takes Hibiki into a nearby cave to hide from the wolves, and once they're inside, she uses earth magic in an attempt to block off the entrance for their safety. However, the wolves begin using their vines to break away at the blockade, and there's nowhere for them to run while they are in here, so Lillian desperately begins using wind magic to try and keep the wolves out, but it's only a matter of time before she runs out of stamina, so this is a hopeless situation. And throughout this whole thing, Hibiki can do nothing but lie on the ground because he still can't move his body. He asks Sappo to scan his body or figure out what's wrong with him, and he is informed that he was hit with poison when he was attacked, which is why he can't move and why his bleeding couldn't be stopped with a health potion. Hibiki asks Sappo to cast cure spells on himself, but Sappo tells him that due to his weakened body and mind, he can't cast those spells right now, so it is going to take some time to activate. However, Hibiki doesn't have any time to wait because Lillian is on the verge of breaking down trying to defend him, and Claude is back there fighting all by himself, and Hibiki desperately wants to stop being useless for once and help his friends, so he pushes with everything he's got, trying to get himself to move. All the determination Hibiki just exhibited must have had an effect on the system, because a moment later, Sappo informs Hibiki that his job level just shot up from level 5 all the way up to level 15. As a result, Hibiki is now able to cast the Hypercure spell to get the poison out of his system, and once he is back on his feet, he wants to help Lillian. So Sappo tells him to use a Summon Sacred Beast spell, and all of a sudden, a giant white tiger appears. This is Vene in his true form, Venezilian, the sacred beast of lightning, and he is easily able to decimate the wolves all in one go. After the wolves are gone, Hibiki asks Vene if that's really what he looks like, and Vene explains that thanks to the summoning spell Hibiki cast, he is temporarily able to access his full power, although it doesn't last very long. Hibiki wants to go save Claude, so he asks Sappo if he can cast the spell on Vene again, but Sappo tells him the spell has a long cooldown timer, so he won't be able to cast it again anytime soon. If that's the case, then Hibiki says he's just going to have to do something about it himself, but Vene warns him that the big monster that attacked back there was a silver diamond wolf, and he doesn't stand a chance against something like that, but Hibiki refuses to just let Claude die. He is sure Claude would want them to escape while they can, but just as much as Claude wants to protect them. Hibiki also wants to protect Claude, and Lillian agrees with him. Just then, Sappo tells Hibiki that he now has access to something called the Medicine God's Staff, and it can apparently fully heal all beings within a certain range, but there are some drawbacks. However, before Sappo could tell Hibiki what those drawbacks were, he had already activated the ability, and in that moment, both he and Lillian are completely healed, and a seedling sprouts from the ground, creating a bow. Hibiki picks the bow up, and as soon as he touches it, he is informed that he has gained the spirit archery skill. Hibiki recalls that spirit archery was the same skill Amalia had, so he tries it out, and with this bow, he is actually able to shoot arrows flawlessly, so he finally has a way to fight for himself, and he is going to use this power to save Claude. They all race off on one of Lillian's lion golems, but as they are heading towards Claude, Hibiki's scan picks up 3 different groups of wolves heading their way from all 3 directions. They can't afford to suffer any delays if they want to save Claude's life, but if they leave these wolves and run ahead, then they'll just block them in from behind. So Hibiki suggests they should just wipe out the wolves all at once. First, he takes aim at the wolves up ahead, but even though the bow gives him a great accuracy boost, it's still really hard for him to aim when he can barely see ahead of him. Fortunately, Sappo comes up with a solution and tells Hibiki to use the Expert Eye ability in tandem with his bow, and when Hibiki does so, it basically gives him aim lock hacks. So as long as he clearly identifies the target he is trying to hit, his arrows will never miss. As he fires, every single arrow he launches gets a headshot, and he is honestly a bit frightened by how efficient this thing is at killing. But there's no time to worry about that right now. There are still 2 groups of wolves approaching from the sides, so Ven tells Lillian to use her magic to take them out, and she obliges, using a powerful wind/spell to wipe out the first group of wolves, and a wood spell to impale the second group of wolves back to back. All the wolves have been taken care of now, so there's nothing stopping them from getting to Claude. But Hibiki is honestly surprised that mere wolves would be smart enough to come up with a pincer attack like that in the first place. Bene explains that the wolves themselves weren't the ones who came up with the strategy. It was the work of the Diamond Silver Wolf that's leading them. Hibiki asks if that means the Diamond Wolf is the one responsible for all this, but Ven isn't so sure because he suspects that the woman they met earlier is probably the real culprit somehow. After all, they never would have come this far into the forest and fallen into that trap if she didn't lead them here. And for some reason, Veni feels like he has seen her face somewhere before. Meanwhile, Ivel is watching Claude's battle with a smile on her face, and she's hoping for him to suffer more and more so she can corrupt the soul she's after more and more. Claude has been fighting non-stop for several minutes now, and though he had managed to take out a majority of the wolves, he is already very badly injured, and the Diamond Wolf is still very much a threat to him. Looking at the wolf reminds him a lot of Anastasia, and he can tell that she's in there somewhere, so he asks why she's doing this to him, but the wolf just howls and charges at Claude. Claude does his best to try and defend himself, but it's already too late because the wolf evaded his strike and tore a chunk out of Claude's abdomen, causing him to cough up blood and fall over. The wolf is about to finish Claude off, but just then, Hibiki fires a shot right at its head. However, to his surprise, the wolf blocks the shot with ease even though it was perfectly aimed. Hibiki doesn't understand how his shot could have failed, but Ven explains to him that diamond wolves have an inherent skill called adamantine shield, and while Hibiki's aim is flawless now, the amount of power in his shots is still limited, so he isn't going to be able to bypass the shield. Knowing that Hibiki isn't a real threat, the wolf ignores all the subsequent shots from him and turns back to Claude to finish him off. Hibiki and the others are powerless to do anything about it since they are too far away to stop the wolf physically, but fortunately, out of desperation, Hibiki accidentally activates the summon feature of his contract with Claude, allowing him to summon Claude to his side. Claude is safe for now, but he is still severely wounded and bleeding out, so Hibiki prepares to start treating him immediately, and to make sure the wolf doesn't interfere, Lillian uses her full power to put up a wind curtain. This stops the wolf in its tracks, but it immediately switches tactics and begins firing rocks at the wind curtain, trying to break through. Lillian is able to hold it back for now, but she won't last very long, so Hibiki needs to hurry up and heal Claude. He asks the system to analyze Claude's condition, and to his surprise, he discovers that Claude is afflicted with the Deerth poison as well, so he starts by getting the poison out of Claude's system. While he does so, he starts wondering how the wolf even managed to poison Claude in the first place since it doesn't naturally produce the Deerth poison, so he scans its body through the wind, and he discovers that the wolf is actually afflicted with the Deerth poison, which is why its attacks spread the poison to others. And something else Hibiki notices is that the wolf is apparently serving a woman named Anastasia. He feels like he has heard that name somewhere else before, but he can't quite put his finger on it until he finally recalls that Anastasia was the woman from Claude's backstory who betrayed him. For now, Hibiki needs to handle Claude's condition, so he attempts to use Perfect Heal, but gets an error message telling him he can't use that spell because he doesn't have enough MP. All the MP Hibiki uses to cast his spells comes from Lillian, but since she is currently burning through a ton of MP to keep the barrier up, she must be on the verge of running out. Thus, Hibiki decides to use a regular heal spell on Claude to at least help him recover from his fatal wounds. Once Hibiki is done, Claude's wounds have been healed, but he still hasn't woken up yet. And to make matters worse, Lillian is completely out of MP now. So the wind curtain comes down, and the wolf is about to attack again. Hibiki draws his bow and aims at the wolf, knowing full well that his arrows won't really hurt it, but he doesn't exactly have many other options. The wolf charges at Hibiki, and predictably, Hibiki's arrow bounces right off its shield, but just as the wolf is about to tear into him, Claude gets back up and stops the wolf with his fist. Claude's strength isn't enough to overpower the wolf, but Sapo activates the Enlighten Mode skill for Hibiki, allowing him to tap into Claude's hidden potential, essentially undoing the curse altogether and returning him to full strength. With his power restored, Claude knocks the wolf back several meters with a single punch, and then he asks Hibiki to please wait here while he goes to finish off that wolf. Hibiki asks him how he's going to do that when he lost his weapon, but Claude simply opens his hand and materializes his true spirit weapon. He then leaps into the air and activates one of his special skills, Pointing Gravity. This skill pretty much binds the target and ensures that no matter how much they try to dodge or evade, his spear will still strike. And once the wolf has been bound, Claude launches his spear, eviscerating the wolf along with half the cliffside. By the time the dust settles down, the only thing left is the wolf's head, and when Hibiki appraises it, he learns that the corrupted soul fragment of Anastasia which had been bound to the wolf has been freed. That makes it sound like Anastasia was the woman being controlled instead of the other way around, so Hibiki is rather confused. Just then, he hears a voice behind him thanking him for setting her free because now she won't be forced to commit evil acts against her will anymore. She also apologizes for everything she has done to Claude and all the suffering she has caused him, but he should be able to finally live in peace now. And after saying that, she fades away. A moment later, Claude comes over to Hibiki to see if he's okay, and Hibiki tells him he's fine, but more importantly, he asks if this means Claude's curse has finally been lifted. Claude indeed confirms that he no longer feels the effects of the curse, but he doesn't think it's going to last much longer. Just as Claude suspected, a moment later, Hibiki gets a message telling him that Enlightened Mode's duration has come to an end, so Claude's power is once again restricted. Claude tells Hibiki that there's something he wants to talk about, so he explains the entire story of what happened between him and Anastasia, and how she betrayed him to join those who put the curse on him. But that doesn't mean they can get rid of the curse by defeating Anastasia, because she wasn't the one who personally placed the curse on Claude, and he knows for a fact that she's already dead because he killed her with his own two hands. However, since Anastasia had the ability to core control monsters by using fragments of her soul, then that must mean the fragments must have survived. He apologizes to Hibiki for all the trouble he caused, but Hibiki tells him he has nothing to be sorry for because none of this was his fault. But while he's mid-speech, Hibiki ends up passing out because of all the strain using his powers put on his body earlier. Sometime later, Hibiki and the others make it back home, and while having a nap, Sappo announces that Hibiki's level has risen from 12 to 25, and when Hibiki wakes up, he finds out that he has been asleep for quite a while because using Enlightened mode really took a toll on his body, so he is going to need to be extra careful next time he plans to use it. Meanwhile, over in the Elf Kingdom, Amalia is attending the royal party when she runs into the king, and he is really happy to see her since he wasn't expecting her to return for an event like this. She explains that her father happened to call her back to the country, which is why she's here, and speaking of her father, she's been itching to give him a piece of her mind for tricking her into coming back for a stupid party. A moment later, the prince comes up to greet Amalia as well, but she doesn't recognize him at all, so she asks if they have met before. The prince isn't surprised that she doesn't know who he is since the last time she saw him. He was only 10 years old, so he introduces himself and explains to her that his name is Verdalis, and he is the prince. Amalia now remembers him, and she says it's nice to see him again, but then Verdalis holds her hand and starts talking about how beautiful she is, trying to shoot his shot. However, Amalia is at least 40 years older than him, so from her perspective, this is really uncomfortable. After a while, the king calls for the attention of everyone at the party and announces to them that the reason for this gathering was to celebrate the two shining hopes of the kingdom, Verdalis and Melanchoris. He explains that even though they are both only 15 years old, they have been blessed with the greatest jobs imaginable, that of a hero and that of a sage, and this is terrific news for their country, since it is the role of the hero to slay the demon king. Verdalis and Melanchoris are going to set out to begin their quest, but they won't be able to do it alone, which is why an adventuring party has been assembled for them. Amalia is completely caught off guard by all this new information since she had no idea about any of this, and as the speech continues, it is announced that the first member of the party is going to be Doguire, the country's finest warrior, and that the second member is going to be Amalia. Everyone in the hall turns to Amalia, and they all look at her with admiration for volunteering to join the hero's party, but that's the problem. Amalia didn't volunteer for this shit. To make matters worse, Verdalis announces in front of everyone that after he has slain the Demon King, he plans to return and propose to Amalia, which is almost just as bad. There's no way she can turn down the mission now that it has already been announced, so Amalia skedaddles before they could call her up on stage. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Hibiki and the others have just gotten back from eating dinner, and they are absolutely stuffed because Tanya made a feast to celebrate Hibiki's recovery. Now that they've all eaten, Hibiki gets everyone's attention and tells them that he wants to go to Terra Dinas after all because he needs to find a way back to his original world. After all, his family and friends are all back there, but that doesn't mean he wants to leave Lillian and Claude behind. The time he has spent with them is very precious to him, so he says he wants to find a way to bring them to his world as well. Lillian is really happy to hear him say that because it means she will get to stay by his side, and Claude asks Hibiki how he intends to do something like that, but he has no idea. He hasn't even figured out how to get himself back home yet, let alone other people, but Claude is sure he'll think of something eventually. Vene reminds Hibiki that he's going to need to pass through the northern dungeon if he wants to get to Terra Dinas, but Hibiki is already aware of that, which is why he's going to need everyone's help to make it happen, and they are all more than happy to support him. As for Amalia, she is currently in a rush to change clothes and get out of the Elf Kingdom as fast as possible before she's forced to join the hero's party. Lillian recalls that Hibiki said there are people back home that he misses, so she asks him what those people were like, and he explains that they were his friends and family. He says they always used to have so much fun with them hanging out and drinking black tea, but Lillian has never heard of black tea before, so that part kind of confuses her a little. Claude mentions that if Hibiki misses his friends that much, then they must no doubt miss him a lot too, and Hibiki is sure that's the case. But they still have each other by their sides, and Hibiki has Claude and the others to keep him company. Later that day, Hibiki heads down to the guild with the others and is called into a meeting with Balls. Balls already heard all about the battle Hibiki had with the Diamond Wolf, and he is impressed that Hibiki and the others managed to beat it since it is an incredibly powerful beast. However, he is also really disappointed in himself because if he had trained Hibiki's muscles a little more, then maybe he wouldn't have collapsed after defeating the wolf. Anyway, the reason Hibiki was called in today was to discuss his payment for defeating the wolf, and when Hibiki takes a look at the contract, he is stunned and asks if it's really okay for him to take this much money. Balls assures him that he deserves every penny because if that diamond wolf had made it to town, then there's no telling how much death and destruction it would have caused. So Hibiki really saved them from a lot of trouble. Hibiki is grateful for the reward, and with this much money, they should be able to stock up for their trip through the dungeon in no time. So afterwards, they immediately head over to the Debbie Trading Company. Debbie is really happy to see Hibiki again, and he can smell the scent of fortune on him even stronger than before now. Hibiki still thinks Debbie is a little weird, but he's the best trader around, so he had no choice but to come here. Debbie also greets Claude and Lillian and welcomes them back, and it's at this point that Hibiki recalls that he got Claude from Debbie's company initially. So Debbie should be aware of the fact that Claude's arm and leg have grown back. Hibiki starts trying to think of an excuse for how that happened without revealing his power, but Debbie tells him that there's no need for him to worry because he has a policy of not interfering in the personal lives of customers. After that, Debbie invites Hibiki to take a look at his wide selection of tools and equipment, and after taking a quick look around, Hibiki decides to buy this wind tunic because the wind magic imbued in it should help him evade attacks better. Debbie asks him if he would like to pick out a weapon as well, but Hibiki says he's fine with the weapon he already has. After all, you can't get much better than a god weapon. Lillian, on the other hand, does need a new staff, so she decides to get this blossom wand, and Hibiki thinks it really suits her. After confirming their purchases, Debbie thanks Hibiki and rings them up to a total of 1,200 gold coins, which has Hibiki shook at first since that sounds like a lot, but Claude says that's actually one of the best deals you'll find in this town. Claude then goes on to pick out a new set of armor, and Hibiki is a little concerned because the armor doesn't cover his stomach at all, and that seems like a pretty big flaw. But Debbie tells him there's no need to worry because the armor actually has high-grade protection magic imbued in it. So even though it looks like it only covers Claude's chest, it actually gives his whole body protection equivalent to that of a full suit of armor. Hibiki takes a look with his appraisal skill, and he confirms that everything Debbie said is true, so he is fine with it. Hibiki then asks Claude what he's going to get for his new weapon, and Claude says he was thinking of getting this Magnetica spear, so Hibiki takes a look at its stats for him. The spear apparently has multiple separable sections and a strong magnetic field, which can be used to deflect the attacks of his opponents or to launch projectiles if necessary. And Hibiki thinks that sounds pretty good, so he's fine with Claude getting it. Debbie is impressed that Hibiki was capable of getting all of that info at a glance, so he asks him what level his appraisal skill is currently at. Hibiki casually answers that his appraisal skill is currently at level 5, and Debbie is absolutely amazed when he hears that because it's almost unheard of. Hibiki asks if level 5 is really that high, so Debbie explains that most appraisers are only level 1 or 2, and even the veteran in-house appraiser they have here at the trading company is still only level 3. So Hibiki's skill being at level 5 is astonishing. This is the first Hibiki is hearing of this, and he blames the chief god for not telling him about how OP his appraisal skill was sooner, but he just forgot. But that aside, while the chief god is still in contact with Hibiki, he tells him that he should be able to use his relief skill again since he leveled up quite a bit in the previous battle. However, he's going to have to test it out later because Debbie comes over and asks him if he plans to get himself a carriage or anything else for his journey, because if so, given enough time, Debbie can arrange anything for him, and that would actually be a huge help for Hibiki, so he decides to take him up on his offer. Later on, Hibiki and the others head out into the forest, and Hibiki prepares to use his relief magic on Claude. Once activated, Sappo locks onto the cursed chains around Claude and asks Hibiki if he would like to have them removed, and after he confirms as much, Sappo proceeds to summon Carbuncle. Hibiki is a little confused by this since he has no idea who Carbuncle is, but it turns out that Carbuncle is a bunny magical beast that serves the chief god, and he's here to help break some of Claude's chains. The second Hibiki sees Car, he immediately dives at him and begins snuggling him because he thinks he is really cute. And at first Car was against it, but then he realizes that the snuggles actually feel pretty good, so he's fine with it. However, Claude, on the other hand, is most certainly not okay with it because he can't stand the sight of someone else stealing all of Hibiki's attention. In fact, he is so upset that it almost looks like he's about to break through the cursed chains on his own, so the others start cheering him on. But Veni smacks some sense into them because there's no way Claude could break the chains on his own, and he tells Car to stop messing around and get to work already. Carbuncle recognizes Ven as a fellow magical beast, but he has no idea why Ven is here or why Claude is glaring at him so much. However, he still has a job to do, so he activates his powers and forms 2 magic arms to begin pulling at Claude's chains. It takes a lot of effort on his part, but eventually, Car is able to break 2 more of Claude's chains, and this means Claude is closer to finally reclaiming his true strength. So he thanks Hibiki for his help. Hibiki tells him that Car is the one who did all the work here, so if anything, he should be thanking him. But Claude is still really angry about Car stealing Hibiki's attention. So even though he does thank him, it feels more like a threat than a display of gratitude, and Car doesn't want to stick around to find out how far Claude is willing to go, so he says he's going home immediately. Later on in the day, the temperature reaches a sweltering 39 degrees Celsius, and Claude is on the verge of having a full-on heat stroke with all his fur. By comparison, Hibiki and the others are doing a lot better, although they are also sweating a lot, but if they don't do something soon, then Claude may end up passing out, so Hibiki suggests they should cut off all of Claude's hair. Hearing that scares Claude because he doesn't want to end up going bald, but since it's Hibiki's command, he can't refuse. Lillian takes a pair of scissors and is about to begin cutting, but just then, Ven tells her he has a better suggestion in mind. Lillian seems to like the idea, so she proceeds to cast a water ball spell with a maintenance spell to keep its shape, and thanks to that, she's able to create these floating bubbles to help everyone keep cool for now. Just then, Tanya comes bursting through the door in a sweaty mess and asks Hibiki for help because the heat is really starting to get to her. So to help her cool off, Hibiki decides to use the bubble wash spell on her, and it works really well. But it also creates quite a strong draft, and Tanya wasn't wearing any underwear. A little while later, Hibiki says he wants to go out and look for a way to beat the heat, but since Claude needs Lillian here to keep the water bubbles going, he decides to take Ven with him instead. The heat outside is even worse than it is indoors, so there's almost no one on the street at the moment, but after a few minutes of walking, Hibiki happens to run into Debbie in the middle of an errand. Debbie is happy to see Hibiki again, but he tells him that if this is about the carriage he ordered, then it's probably going to take a little while longer to arrange, but Hibiki doesn't care about that right now. He's much more interested in finding out why Debbie doesn't seem to be sweating at all even though he's facing the same heat as everyone else. Debbie explains that it's thanks to a special product he happened to get his hands on called the Cloak of Everlasting Spring, and he'd love to sell some to Hibiki, but he's out of stock, and he needs a special flower to make more. So Hibiki heads to the guild to ask where the rune flowers grow. He is informed that they grow deep in the forest to the east, but the road through the forest is extremely complicated, so she's not sure he will be able to find his way there. Even so, Hibiki says he still wants to go looking for the flowers, so she offers to show him the way since the guild isn't busy right now, and she's got some free time. With her help, Hibiki eventually finds a whole patch of those flowers, so after delivering them to Debbie to have the cloaks made, he returns home. All that walking under the hot sun really made Hibiki hungry, but it's still too early for dinner, so he doesn't have anything to eat yet. Fortunately for him, it just so happens that Lillian and Claude prepared a gift for him in advance, and it turns out to be some black tea and snacks. They recalled Hibiki saying he missed having tea with his friends back home, so they wanted to try making him feel better, and Hibiki is really grateful for how thoughtful Lillian has been. Looking at her like this reminds Hibiki that it has been quite a while since he checked her status, so he decides to do so now, and to his surprise, he finds out that Lillian is a fully fledged sage now. Before, her status used to say Sage Candidate, but now she's a level 1 sage, and it must have happened after she leveled up from the battle against the wolves. Lillian says she doesn't really feel any different, but Claude says it probably just takes time for the effects to set in. Vene asks if any other skills leveled up recently, and now that he mentions it, Hibiki's Grimoire skill did go up to level 2. And Vene is excited to hear that because it means he can learn all sorts of new magic spells now. And who knows, there may even be some magic that Hibiki will be able to learn in there. So Hibiki is excited as well. A few days later, it is finally time for the group to depart on their journey. So Hibiki gives Claude and Lillian the cloaks he had made for them, and explains that they have special magic that keeps the wearer cool, no matter what the weather may be. Claude is especially grateful that Hibiki went so far for him, so he vows to treasure his gift, and after everyone is done saying their goodbyes, Hibiki and the others finally set off for the northern dungeon, after which they'll be heading to Terradina's. But behind a tree nearby, Ivel overhears where they are heading, and she plans to make sure Hibiki and the others don't make it out of that dungeon alive. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, it turns out that Hibiki's friends were actually reincarnated into this world as well and have formed a party called the Corpse Killers in hopes of finding a way to reunite with him. After setting out on the journey, Hibiki is feeling a little more confident in himself because he can finally take down monsters on his own. But Sapo corrects him and reminds Hibiki that the only reason he can fight is because his bow is overpowered, and he himself is actually still very weak, so he shouldn't get ahead of himself here. Claude and Lillian also think Hibiki is still a weakling overall, so Claude tells Hibiki to stop cracking jokes about being strong and hurry up because they need to get back on the road. Everyone gets back in the carriage, and Hibiki is grumbling about how he really is strong now because the bow is one of his skills, but be that as it may. Claude tells him that he can't neglect his daily training because even if he has powerful skills at his disposal, a time will come where he may not be able to use those skills in battle, so he needs to be prepared for that. Hibiki has been awfully silent throughout the ride so far, so Lillian asks him if he's alright, but it turns out that all the bumps in the road are giving Hibiki some gnarly motion sickness, and before they can do anything to help, Hibiki has already puked all over the carriage floor. They end up having to stop to clean up all the vomit, and Hibiki apologizes to the others for the trouble since he had no idea that he would get carriage sick, but as he is heading over to a nearby lake to clean up a little, he dips his hands in the water and discovers that it isn't actual water at all, but rather a large collection of slimes. Hibiki is surprised since he has never seen something like this before, but Claude thinks this is the perfect opportunity for him to give Hibiki some real training. So he asks Hibiki to go out and take out a couple of slimes, but he tells him to do it without using his overpowered bow. Lillian tells Claude that a handicap like that is unfair because Hibiki is absolutely useless without his bow, but Claude says he's still going to let Hibiki have a weapon. And the weapon in question is a wooden stick that's on fire. Hibiki decides to give it his best shot, but no matter how hard he tries, he can't keep up with the slimes at all, so he fails to hit even a single one. On top of that, one of the slimes manages to land right on top of Hibiki's face, and he can't get it off, so he's starting to suffocate. As Hibiki slowly loses consciousness, his life begins to flash before his eyes, but at the last second, he realizes he can't afford to leave his friends behind, especially not by dying at the hands of a slime, so he fights with everything he's got, and eventually, he unlocks the ability to use a little fire magic, allowing him to burn the slime enough to get it off him. Hibiki is both relieved to be alive and amazed that he really awakened fire magic, but the slime he burned seems to be really mad, so it goes and fuses with all the other slimes present to transform into a giant slime monster. Hibiki doesn't seem all too bothered by it at first since he knows slimes are weak to fire, so he attempts to use his new fire magic, but to his dismay, he only manages to produce a small 2-inch flame from his finger. Lillian tries to cheer him up by telling him 2 inches is a perfectly respectable size, but it's clearly not enough to handle this slime, so Hibiki ends up spending the rest of the day getting manhandled by a gelatinous creature until the slime finally gets bored of toying with him and decides to leave on its own. After that, Lillian goes up to Hibiki and tries to cheer him up again by reminding him that even if his fire magic isn't very big, it's still fire magic nonetheless, so there are many ways he can still use it. Claude suggests they should set up camp for the night here, and while dinner is cooking, Hibiki uses his fire magic to light a lantern, and he has to admit that the fire magic is pretty convenient to have even if it's weak. After they've all eaten, Lillian and Veni go to sleep while Hibiki and Claude stay up a little later to chat. Hibiki asks Claude if he really thinks he's going to be okay even though his strength hasn't improved by much since they set out, and Claude tells Hibiki that there's something he would like to clarify. He had already mentioned that to get to Terra Dines, you need to pass through the northern dungeon, but to be more specific, Terra Dines is only accessible to people who have conquered the dungeon, and that is completely uncharted territory, which is why Claude has been so insistent on Hibiki's training, because he wants him to be prepared for anything that might happen. And he promises that no matter what, he is going to help Hibiki get to Terra Dines. After that, it's time for them to get some sleep, but just before Hibiki lays down, he receives a message from Sapo, telling him that he has unlocked several new skills. Hibiki checks his stat window, and he is shocked to see that he indeed has 4 new skills, but he's too tired to think about that right now, so he decides to test them out later. The next day, the group gets back on the road, but while traveling, they see a large group of villagers hanging out in the middle of the road. Hibiki pops out to ask them if something happened, and the villagers inform him that their village was recently overrun with undead monsters. Hibiki asks if they are referring to things like zombies, which the villager confirms, and to make matters worse, it wasn't just 1 or 2 zombies either, it was a whole horde of them. Fortunately, a nice beast woman happened to be passing by, so she told them to wait here while she handles the zombies. And Claude is surprised to hear this because a warrior who is capable of defeating such a large horde of zombies on their own must be quite experienced. Claude initially suggests they should take a detour to avoid any possible encounters with the zombies, since that would be safer. But Lillian doesn't like the sound of that since a detour is going to waste a lot of time, and she wants to help Hibiki return home as soon as possible. Hearing her say that, Claude begins rethinking things a little, and it's true that going straight here would be the fastest option, and on top of that, if they are going to conquer the northern dungeon, then they are bound to encounter threats even more terrifying than the dungeon monsters. So he decides that this is actually a great opportunity for Hibiki to get some first-hand combat experience, so he tells him they are going straight into the zombie-infested village. A short while later, they arrive at the village, and Hibiki can't believe he's really going to have to fight zombies. But Claude assures him that there's nothing to worry about because zombies move very slowly, so even someone like Hibiki should be able to beat them. As they walk, the group notices a bunch of holes dug in the ground, so Claude explains that those are likely traps laid by the villagers in order to stop the zombies. There are probably many more of those around here, so he warns Hibiki to watch his step, but immediately after he says that, Hibiki gets startled by the fact that the wolf caught in one of the traps is an undead, so it is still capable of moving around, and he then proceeds to fall into every other trap in the area, which pisses Claude off a little since he was supposed to be extra careful. Just then, a group of zombies come charging straight at Hibiki, but before they could do anything, they all got crushed by a boulder. A moment later, the mysterious beast woman who is here to take down the zombies shows herself, and as soon as he sees her, Hibiki recognizes her as Fauna, but he's got no idea what she's doing here. Fauna explains that after she left Raoul, she had been wandering around for a while until she eventually ended up in this village, and that's when she heard about all the undead, so she decided to help. Hibiki is just glad that Fauna is okay, but Claude asks what reason a thief like her would have for helping the villagers. Fauna says there's no particular reason for what she's doing, she just decided to do it because a little kid asked her to. She explains that she was the one who set up all those traps around the village, but now she's got to reset them because Hibiki ruined most of the traps. Hibiki apologizes for that, but Fauna tells him he's going to have to make up for it by helping her defeat the zombies. Normally, defeating undead monsters isn't that difficult since they operate like a mindless herd, but Fauna says the ones here seem to be a bit different because they are actually organized, and that is what has her so concerned. However, Hibiki doesn't think it's going to be a big problem since they've got Claude here to help them in case anything does go wrong, but his confidence seems a little misplaced because right after saying that, he falls into yet another one of Fauna's traps. Fauna is surprised that Hibiki still hasn't learned the trap detection skill even though he's an appraiser, but he didn't even know a skill like that existed in the first place, so he has no idea how to acquire it. Fauna explains to him that he just needs to keep appraising traps, and sooner or later, he's going to gain the skill naturally. She also tells him that as an appraiser, he should probably make a habit of appraising everything he can so he doesn't fall for traps like that in the future, and Claude agrees with her on that, so Hibiki promises to do so. Afterwards, they all head into the village's church, but all of a sudden, they hear the deafening sound of the church bells ringing, so they all rush outside to escape the noise. But all of a sudden, dozens of undead begin to emerge from the ground, and even though Claude is able to cut them down with ease, Lillian's magic isn't enough to stop them, so they won't be able to get rid of all of them on their own. Fauna yells for everyone to get back into the church before it's too late, so they all rush back in, and that's when she explains that for some reason, every time that bell rings, more zombies appear out of nowhere, and she had no idea why. It doesn't look like they'll be able to stop the zombies until they figure out what's going on with the bell, so Hibiki decides to head up there with Lillian, and in the meantime, Claude and Fauna are put in charge of keeping the zombie horde busy. They charge out of the church and immediately begin working together to take down the zombies, but more zombies keep coming, so there's no end in sight. Hibiki and Lillian have managed to make it up onto the bell platform, and Hibiki tries to fire off a few shots to help Claude, but it doesn't do much aside from stunning the zombies for a bit, and the bell keeps on ringing despite the fact that no one else is up here to ring it. It turns out that the one behind it is Ivel, and this is yet another one of her plans to take Claude down, but Hibiki and the others have no idea that she's involved, so he still needs to figure out how to stop the bell from here. He begins appraising the church bell, but to his surprise, the system tells him that it's just an ordinary bell. Hibiki doesn't understand how that's possible since there's clearly something going on here, so he decides to use appraisal on the surrounding area as well. After doing so, Hibiki ends up finding a magic mirror that Ivel had hidden in the tower, and the zombie summoning magic is clearly coming from it, so Hibiki fires a bunch of arrows at the mirror. His arrows aren't strong enough to destroy it, but since they have 100% accuracy, the arrows bounce off the mirror at just the right angle to hit Ivel, who is standing a kilometer away on a cliff. And once her mirror is destroyed, the zombies finally stop spawning. With the zombies finally gone, the villagers can finally return home. And they are all extremely grateful to Hibiki, but he doesn't deserve such praise since he kind of destroyed their church in the process. However, the villagers tell him that there's no need to worry about that since they can have it fixed in no time. Claude is glad everyone made it out all right, but he is still curious about who was behind this whole thing since they never figured it out, and out in the forest, Ivel is thinking over the strange arrows she saw Hibiki use today to thwart her plans. She thinks they're going to be a huge obstacle to her plot to murder Claude, but she is sure that with a little preparation, she can ensure victory next time. This was the end of episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part.